Thank you for everyone for joining us today. Hello and welcome to day 2 of the 2024 US Expats Financial Conference, brought to you by American Expat Direct and sponsored by Expat Focus, the web's favorite destination for anyone moving or living abroad. We have a fantastic schedule for you consisting of 9 sessions over 3 days, covering multiple aspects of financial information for Americans living abroad, with perspectives from some of the world's foremost experts in their fields. Today is the second day of the conference, and for this, our first session of the day, I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Hart from Spartan FX. We'll be talking about international currency transfer considerations and strategies for US expats. Before we start, though, please bear in mind that the information presented is for general educational purposes only, and you should always seek your own personalized financial advice. Michael will be answering your questions at the end, so please add them in the Q&A pop-up at the foot of your screen throughout. We'll try to answer them all, time permitting. So without further ado, over to you, Michael.
Lovely. So good morning, good afternoon, welcome. Lovely to be here today. So yeah, my name's Michael, work at Spartan FX. We are an international payments provider, so we help individuals and companies move money from one currency to another. And our job today is to sort of educate you a little bit onto essentially the mistakes not to make when moving your money across, because they can be costly. So it's our job to sort of just go through exactly what's involved in moving money across. As we touched on sort of very briefly, I've been in the industry for about 16, 17 years now, helping thousands of individuals move all over the world. And Spartan FX very much specializes in helping with migration and individuals moving. So you're in safe hands. What I'll sort of cover over is the mistakes to avoid. So first of all, will be a bit about sort of exchange rates. Then we'd be looking at the sort of compliance side of things, considerations sort of moving your money before or after you go, bank transfers and digital offerings, and then sort of opening up a bank account in another country, because that can be tricky as well. So essentially, why do we exist? We're an alternative to the bank for moving your money from one currency to another. And if there's one thing we say don't do is don't just let your US or Canadian or wherever the funds are coming from bank move the money straight into another currency. Typically, they will offer very poor exchange rates, and they won't be very qualified in the transfer as well. So that's the sort of the key point to take away is don't use your bank. There are digital offerings as well, which we'll go into a bit later into the presentation. But yeah, the big part of currency is exchange rate. That's the one thing that people generally know is that there are movements in the exchange rate, and when you're moving or going on holiday and to another country, it doesn't necessarily make as much of a difference. If you think about moving your life assets across, a very small difference in the exchange rate can make a big difference to how many euros or pounds you'll be getting at the other end. So it's my job to sort of explain a couple of the options that you've got available to yourself. With a service, you can do either a spot contract or a forward contract. So spot is just buy now, pay now. So I say I want to move $10,000 into euros. You send the $10,000, convert it into euros, and then pay it to a euro bank account. Very simple. Forward contract, which is quite a popular tool in recent times, especially as the US dollar has been so strong. Essentially, you can lock into the current exchange rate with a 10% deposit of the total amount that you're transferring. So say, for example, you were selling $100,000, you could send $10,000 deposit, set a date up to a year in the future to settle that contract, and then that exchange rate is fixed. So it means that in a year's time, no matter what happens to the exchange rate, you know exactly how many euros you're going to receive, which is good for planning and working out what your sort of spending power might be in Europe or in the UK. it also means that you can still earn interest on the remaining 90% of those funds for that period of time. Especially as, the migration process doesn't happen overnight. A lot of the people we speak to say to us, well, actually, I'm not moving till November 24, or even November 25. They will say to us, okay, well, I don't need these funds straight away, but I want to take advantage of this this current exchange rate while the dollar is strong. And we're starting to sort of see rumors that the Fed might start thinking about cutting interest rates. I know that there's some very good non-farms employment data on Friday, but it is being talked about, and if the Fed do start cutting interest rates, we will probably see the dollar weaken a little bit. So now is a reasonably good opportunity for selling dollars into the likes of euros and sterling. So that's a way you can take advantage of a good exchange rate and still earn interest in a sort of money markets account in the US until you actually need those funds further down the line. So that's sort of a bit about the sort of products we offer. This next slide just really demonstrates how much of a difference the movement in exchange rate can make to in this example, how many euros you'll receive at the other end. So between January 22 and October 22, the exchange rate moved 16.7% in your favor at points. So over that period, $250,000 at points was $35,500 cheaper. And then equally between October 22 and August 23, it then moved 10.5% in the other direction, making it over $25,000 more expensive on that same 250,000 euro example. So the reason we put this up is people think, oh, but exchange rate is not going to make that much of a difference. This really shows how crucial it is to try and make sure you convert your funds at the optimal exchange rate, and essentially use us to build a bit of a strategy. As I mentioned, we've got these forward contracts where you can fix a rate in advance. We'll also often say, okay, well, look, you don't need to move all your money across in one go. Let's look at your total requirement. You might be moving initially and say, well, actually, we're not going to buy a house for 3 years, and decide that you don't want to move. You only want to move a minimal amount across to get yourself set up. So we can build a sort of bespoke package to your needs, but most importantly, we can remove as much risk from the situation as possible. We can do that through placing orders into the market. So you could say to us, okay, well, I would like to convert my funds if euro dollar goes back down to 105, for example. Might be a bit optimistic, but it's possible. It's quite good at the moment, but you could say, okay, if it gets to a certain level, say to 105, I'd like to convert my funds. I'd also like to set a worst case scenario of, say, 110. So you have that order in place, say it's for 100,000, say it was to buy 100,000 euros. Worst case scenario, that's going to cost you $110,000. Best case scenario, it's going to cost you $105,000. So using sort of strategies like this is quite a simple example, but it's just a way that we can essentially bookend your exposure, so that categorically, worst case, this migration is or this is the amount of euros you're going to receive. Best case, this is the amount you're going to receive at the other end. So quite a useful tool, and it's it moves away from just sort of leaving it till the last minute and just accepting whatever the rate is a few days before you move, for example. So that's really what we're here to do, is to manage your risk and ensure that you've got a fair idea of what you'd be getting in another currency when you move internationally. So that's like sort of the sort of currency rate side of things. A big part of what we do now has shifted towards compliance. There's a lot more on anti-money laundering regulation. There are more compliance checks on international payments. It's for the better. It's there to reduce fraud and to reduce money laundering, but it does make it harder for your your average Joe that just wants to move their honestly earned money from one country to another. So invariably now you will have to provide more documentation when moving funds. Essentially, the banks want to know where the money's come from and where the money's going to. So you may need to provide sort of source of wealth. That can often be achieved through a recent bank statement showing the funds, or proof of a property sale. And then equally at the other end, if say you're buying £500,000, you then need to say, okay, they might ask, what's that for? And you say, well, actually, I'm buying a property. Here's a property that I'm looking to buy, and things like that. So it's our job to make sure your paperwork's in place to prevent funds being held up. And that's where, there are digital offerings that I'm sure many of you sort of heard of, like wires and things like that, where smaller amounts, they're generally fine. But if you start moving larger amounts, they're more likely to be subject to anti-money laundering regulation and compliance checks. And if they're not in place, then funds can just be frozen. And there have been some horror stories where people can't get access to their money. They're buying they've paid a deposit on a property in Spain, for example. They're due to complete in a couple of days' time, and they've got €500,000 in the ether somewhere, and they can't do anything about it. So that then risks losing a deposit and causing sort of quite significant knock-on effects. So our approach is we do as much of the compliance in advance, and there's always someone to speak to at the other end of the phone. So, we offer that personal service because we know that, navigating through this isn't always completely straightforward. Checking the IBANs is another thing that we do. We ensure that these funds are going to the right place. I know it sounds simple, but it's an IBAN is an international bank account number. It's a format of account number that generally people haven't dealt with previously. So that the way sort of banking details are in Europe and in the UK and the US are all completely different. So it's us making sure that you're essentially putting the right numbers in the right boxes, because when you are sending larger sums, it's worth double checking. We typically always do tester payments as well, and there's no charge for that. You can do a tester payment of €100 into a bank account so that we know it works, and equally you can send us $100 to make sure that it's going into the right account. So yeah, we're just there, a bit more of that personal service, just to make sure everything's running through smoothly. I should say on larger amounts to move across, it's worth doing those extra checks. Big part I'd say is transferring money, or at least setting up things before you leave the US or Canada or wherever you might be leaving. Especially in the US, banking systems are that it can be quite tricky to set up a new beneficiary, so a new payee, so someone that you're paying dollars to, so once you've left the country. So with ourselves, when you register, you get given US dollar bank details in your name, and then when you want to start moving money across, you'd fund that US dollar account. Now, when you're in the US, often you can create that payee quite easily and then start moving money into that account. We've had issues, and this is not just us, this is all providers, where the client's already moved to Portugal, and the bank queries, oh, hang on a minute, this person's logged in from outside the US, we're not letting them create this new payee. Then all of a sudden they can't get their money out of their bank account. So that's one of the key things we say, is always make sure you've got this side of things set up, because once you've created the payee and you've moved it across $1,000 or whatever it might be, it's generally fine moving forward. Doesn't matter where in the world you are, those checks have been done to create that new payee to fund the dollar account, which eventually will be turned into euros. So doing that pre-authorization in advance before you go is important. So planning ahead. Also considering sort of online banking limits. There's every bank's different. Wells Fargo, for example, a lot of their accounts have got $10,000 a day limits and $70,000 transfer limit in a month. So it's quite sort of niche things that they have in place, and that's something you just got to be a bit wary of, that if you are needing to make a large transfer across, check what your sending limits online are. Can you make that payment through telephone banking, or are you better moving the majority of these funds while you're still in the US? And if needs be, you can do the old-fashioned way and go into a bank branch on the high street and actually make the transfer physically in person. So that's worth looking into and checking before you go. You might have a $500,000 a day sending limit, and it's no problem at all. But it's worth checking this in advance to avoid any issues when you get to your destination country. There's also bank clearing times. So we've kind of got used to, especially sort of domestic transfers, going through pretty much instantly these days. International payments still can take longer. There's some banks that they say it will take 5 to 7 days. Typically, funds arrive within anything from an hour to 1 to 2 days, but it can take longer. And that's where, again, we just say be just prepared. Don't, buying a property, completing in 3 days' time, don't think, oh, we've got 3 days, I'll just start moving that money across now. It can take longer. So just to be a bit wary on that side of things, really. And that will hold you in good stead. As I said at the beginning, we're alternative to the bank for moving your money from one country to another. The banks will often try and offer free transfers, so they say they're not going to charge you for the transfer, which they might say that, but the exchange rate they'll offer you will be particularly poor. So there's digital providers as well out there that the services they offer are pretty good for smaller amounts and day-to-day stuff in some cases. But when it comes to moving a larger sum, that's what they're for, to help with the compliance and the anti-money laundering regulation side of things, but to also give you some guidance on putting a strategy in place as to when we feel be a good time to think about moving funds across, and just to really sort of guide you through the whole process and make sure your euros arrive in the right place at the right time. Again, with sort of banks and digital providers, if with the bank you don't know what rate you're going to receive, with the digital provider you might agree a rate, but if funds don't arrive in the right time or it gets frozen, then they can just change your exchange rate on a whim. So that's something to keep an eye out. And especially sort of US banks, they have very little experience with IBANs, so they don't really, they often struggle to actually make payments. So you might end up paying a lot more for your bank to make the transfer, and them not doing a very good job with it. So that's the key. So yeah, essentially don't use your bank for making the transfer, and on large amounts certainly use us compared to a digital offering. I say our rates are competitive with the likes of Wise as well. So essentially you get the better rates with us, but you also get that personal service, whereas the digital offerings, it's not easy to speak to someone. It can take a couple of days to get a response from someone. Consideration obviously is opening a bank account. This is a little bit of chicken and the egg sometimes. So a lot of countries won't let you open a bank account unless you have an address, and you can't have an address unless you've got a bank account. So we do provide an interim solution, whereby with ourselves, when you register, you essentially have a multi-currency account. So you can say, okay, well, I've funded my euro account. I've got 10,000 euros in there. I need to pay a €5,000 rental deposit to Mr. Smith, you can make payments from that Spartan account, and it will come from your named account. So when they receive that rental deposit, it will come from a bank account in your name, and then they'll be happy with that. The landlord will say, yeah, that's fine, it's come from an account, and therefore you get your address, and then you can start to, it's easier to then set up your international bank account, whether that be in Spain, Portugal, or the UK. But typically you always, a lot of the time you need to have some sort of address. Some places you need to have residency, and in other instances you need to be there in person. They actually want to physically see you. So with the Spartan account, it kind of acts in the interim that you can arrive, pay your rental deposit, put a deposit down on a car, pay some legal fees. You can do that all from your Spartan account in advance or when you first arrive. And then once you've set up your bank account, you can then start funding that bank account and then using that for your everyday transactions. We generally also find in sort of a lot of countries, when you do move, your credit rating doesn't necessarily come with you. So it is good to have an actual bank account in the country you're in, because that will probably help with financial sort of applications moving forward. It just creates that sort of credit digital footprint into a new country. Whereas again, some of the digital offerings are not based in the country that you'll be moving to, and therefore it's you don't have that imprint on financially. So that's worth considering. And you know, if you're planning to move to a country for more than 6 months, a year, I'd certainly suggest opening a bank account with one of the major banks in that country. With ourselves, you can also hold funds on account. There's you know, if there's a period of time that you need, you just want to keep euros there as a balance, you're more than welcome to do so. And you know, we've got a lot of clients as well that they might move a larger amount initially, and then they just have regular payments. So they might have their 401k that they want to move across on a monthly basis. They might have passive income coming from a rental that's just, you know, smaller amounts that just ticks along, so they can just have a standing order every month that X amount of dollars drops in, and we can just automatically convert that into euros for you. So you just get euros into, or sterling into your bank account of choice on a monthly basis. So while we do the large amounts, we can still help with smaller transfers and trying to automate things so that, you know, your $2,000 a month just goes straight into the account. It's not something you're having to worry about every month. So yeah, that's certainly something that we can help you with as well. So yeah, I mean, Stadium Points is never too early to have a chat with us. You know, it's, if you're looking to move within the next year, we're happy to have that initial conversation. Even if you're moving in 5 years' time, which some people we speak to are that planning that far ahead, which is impressive, then we'll still have the chat with them. Say, well, we'll touch base in 18 months. That's fine. Always have to have that initial conversation. Don't underestimate rate movements. As sort of demonstrated, you know, a small difference in exchange rate makes a huge difference to your buying power and sort of how much you're going to get at the other end in a currency. So do keep an eye on that. And don't leave things to, you know, the last minute. The number of people I've spoken to over the years that have called me from the airport in a panic, you know, we can get to the solution in the end, but it's better to plan these things ahead, and especially with that sort of pre-authorization, setting up the account, the payee before you go, to make your life a lot easier if you want to start making payments when you've arrived in your destination country. So yeah, they're the key points. These are 3 members of our team. There's 16 of us now at Spartan FX. So, you know, we're big enough now that sort of we've got coverage sort of more or less around the clock, but we still offer a nice personal service and speak to our clients on a regular basis. And you know, that's key. And a lot of our clients have been with us for many years. So which speaks volumes to our service and looking after them. So what I'll leave you with it after I sort of stop sharing the screen. I'll put a link in that you can download our free moving money guide, and then we'll be in touch with that. Feel free to send me an email or get in touch with regard to having a conversation about your migration plans, and of course your currency requirements. So that's all from me. Obviously, I'm more than happy to answer some questions and go from there. Thanks a lot.
Michael, thank you very much. That was fantastic. Now let's move on to questions. Firstly, we've had several questions, and to our audience, do keep, if you have questions about moving currency internationally, about Spartan, drop them in the Q&A box at the foot of the screen. So first one, and this is always a good question. Any tax-related considerations for small money transfers from the UK to the US? And that said £1,000 to £2,000 in that range, especially when using US credit cards in the UK.
I mean, on those small amounts, I don't think there's a major sort of tax consideration, especially as in the UK, it's normally quite clear if you've then been taxed on those funds. I think if you start moving money from a business, it might be then slightly different. But yeah, that is, it shouldn't really be a major concern.
Well, I think moving money that way, I think there may be other, if you move money the other way, and this is, I don't know if you've come across kind of FBAR and FATCA reporting, which are considerations for Americans living abroad where they have to report their kind of offshore non-American bank account balances. And I think that's something that's definitely a consideration when moving money. And there are ways to do it that can, and it's possibly questions for kind of tax professionals who work with expats though. But have you come across those? And the Spartan account you were talking about, I don't know if that, where it technically is, and therefore whether it qualifies for kind of reporting to the US government under FBAR rules.
So as far as I'm aware, it doesn't come under that. Again, this is sort of something you'd need to check with the tax specialist. I know that the 401ks, they can use our facility to get those funds through into their destination country. But yeah, the tax, it's kind of on an individual basis in a lot of cases of people's situations. So I'm not really qualified.
I think there are a couple of questions, but those tax questions, we have tomorrow 3 sessions with CPA, so hold those questions for tomorrow. And there are, I mean, yeah, I don't think sort of moving money itself has any tax implications, either US or, as far as I'm aware, that I've heard of any other country. When it lands in a foreign country, non-US country, there can be reporting implications depending on the amounts, and that's a question for a CPA. But I don't think money's taxed. I mean, it's presumably already been taxed before you transfer it at some point. So
yeah, and if you're buying a property, then and you're moving those funds across, you're not then taxed on that as income. So don't have to worry on that side of things.
Fantastic. So a couple of questions on forward contracts. What's the minimum amount for a forward contract?
So typically the minimum amount you can do a forward contract for is $10,000. So, but as in the actual amount, so you can do it with as little as $1,000 deposit, and you can do a forward from $10,000 and above.
The amount transferred.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people, they do a portion of their requirements. So you can say, okay, well, actually, I don't know. I mean, no one really knows exactly what's happened to the exchange rates. So they can say, okay, well, actually, I'm going to fix in on half of my requirement and see what happens with the rate on the other half. Because then, you're just hedging your bets a little bit. And also at that point, if the rate does continue to go even lower and goes down to 105, 104, then you actually want it to go low because you're going to get your other half done at an even better exchange rate. But what this also removes is the risk that it goes back to 110, 110, 112 again, and you really start to lose out. And Our general view is the dollar will weaken over time because they led the way. The Fed led the way in raising interest rates, and it looks like they're probably leading the way in cutting them. And when the Fed raise rates, interest rates going up, it's more of an incentive to move money into that country, and that's part of the reason the dollar strengthens so much. So it happens in exact reverse in the other direction. So if we do start to see interest rate cuts from the Fed, then the dollar would expect it to move back to 110, 112, and 115, even 125, which we were at not that long ago. So we've got to be sort of aware that it can move a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that's in terms of then it'll become advantageous to move sort of buy dollars, whereas at the moment it's advantageous to buy the other way, I guess.
Yeah. Say dollar buyers, they've had a tough run in the last year or two. But there's been points the sterling US dollar rate went back above 130, which we hadn't seen for quite some time. So again, with an order, you can target a specific rate. So especially dealing with clients that say, I need this money in the next year, they can say, okay, well, if say sterling to US dollar rate goes back to 130 again, I'd like a trigger in place to automatically buy at that point in time. And it's a useful tool in that, again, no one really knows exactly when it's going to get to that level, but we've seen it hit there on 3 or 4 occasions over a set period of time. There's a reasonable chance it will get back up there. Of course, it's not a guarantee, but it's just slightly increasing your chances of getting that rate rather than doing nothing.
Yeah. So somebody says setting up a forward contract to sell dollars and buy either sterling or euros. Can you use a US IRA?
So the funds would generally come from a personal US dollar account. We can accept funds, sort of US dollars from funds. So we've got a lot of clients that have got sort of Charles Schwab accounts or money market accounts. They can come directly from investment accounts. That's no problem.
Yeah, it may be a question for the IRA provider. So because it may be possible, it sounds like if you can, as you say, take payments from funds. And then the same person says, if I'm resident in Italy, can I set up an account in the UK? I guess that refers to possibly to the bank account you mentioned, or maybe just a Spartan account.
Yeah, so I mean, we can onboard from any more or less any country in the world, with a few restrictions. But yeah, you can register from Italy if you're moving money to the UK. If you're in Italy and you've got euros and you're moving to Spain, then we wouldn't suggest using the facility because there does need to be a currency conversion of some kind involved.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody says, what are the amounts before compliance checks kick in?
So it's typically it's from sort of 10,000 above. The reason they try and make this as grey as possible is because if they say, oh, we won't do any compliance to 10,000, then everyone starts sending $9,999. So it can be on any amount. It can be down to the individual. But typically that's 10,000 above are the amounts that they start to potentially show interest in. We get compliance on anything of 10,000 and above, basically, and that's also accumulative. So if you do a 5,000 transfer and a 6,000, you're then over the threshold, and then you've got to provide some documentation. But we just find it's good practice to get documentation in advance, just to where the money's come from. So a lot of the cases it's only sending a downloaded PDF copy of your recent bank statement that shows the money in that account, just so that for those checks, if it does come up, it's available straight away. And that's probably the biggest problem that clients have is if a check is done and the money gets frozen, then they don't have any access to it, and there's no one they can speak to resolve it.
Okay, lots of questions about Spartan here. Did you say that the Spartan account can have or does the international account can have multi-currency pockets? Is it a multi-currency account, the account you mentioned?
Yeah, so when you register, you get a multi-currency account, and you can select balances from any currency. So you would then see your dollar account details. So say your US dollar account details, you would then have an account in your name. So it'd be your own name, bank account number, IBAN, and then equally, say you're buying sterling, you would have then a sterling account in your name, so that when you make a payment to rental, or say for a deposit on a property, that money, that sterling in this instance, would come from an account in your name.
A UK account, so
Yeah,
in that
so it
scenario.
essentially is a multi-currency account.
And then it says, is a Spartan account FDIC insured?
So it's actually,
yeah.
yes, it's actually one above that. So the amounts are actually insured to an unlimited value. So
who insures them?
So basically, we are backed by Visa. So where we get a liquidity is through it's called the Currency Cloud Bank, and they are backed by Visa. And with currency transactions, it's secured to an unlimited amount. I've got a sort of safeguarding funds PDF, which if any clients want me to send that on to them, more than happy to do so. That essentially explains where your money's held when you're transacting with Spartan FX, basically. So yeah, it actually goes one beyond the, like in the UK, it's 85k, UK, and Spain it's similar amount in euros. So yeah, so you're fully covered.
Do you work with accounts in Saudi Arabia?
Yep, yeah, Saudi's fine. So we do pretty much all Emirates currencies, so Oman Rial, and Kuwait dinar, and then just AED for sort of Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So yeah, pretty much all Emirate currencies are absolutely fine.
Great. So Andrew says, what is the size we should consider using Spartan FX? Is one-time $50,000 transfer possible? Or is it primarily focused on ongoing kind of monthly transfers?
So I mean, it's $5,000 to $10,000 and above, it's worth considering our service. Where you're really coming to your own is on the larger amounts, because that's when you get the sort of service from ourselves, of sort of us trying to put a bit of a strategy in place, and using products like the forward contracts that we've discussed. So yeah, if you've got a $50,000 clip to move across, then of course we'll explain what we can do and how we can help, and then you can decide from there. We have got an online platform as well, so when you register, you do get access to the platform where you can do everything on it yourself. And that's what typically the general customer journey is. We'll sort of have a few conversations initially, help you move the money, sort of your larger amounts, sort of over the phone and through email, and then when it's more regular payments, you just log on to your platform and do the transfers yourself. So you know, we've got all the way from high touch to no touch, basically. So we can and any amount really, sort of, well, yeah, $5,000 to $10,000 is the minimum is worth transferring with us. But anything above that, always happy to. One of the guys always happy to have a chat.
Right. Somebody says, how do you compare with TransferWise? But that is Wise, isn't it? I think they just changed their name. And you mentioned, let's say a little bit more about that.
So our rates are competitive with Wise. So typically there's not too much of a difference. It's very easy to compare as well. So again, you can log onto the platform, or you can just ask us for a current rate. It's generally, once you're registered, you can then do that. But yeah, the rates are pretty comparable. But where we excel is that personal service. You know, Wise are good for small amounts, so I can't put them down on that. But where there are issues is on those larger sums, and if you read their reviews, they've got thousands of great reviews, but they've also got a lot of ones where things have gone really wrong. And the number of times we've ended up receiving dollars from a Wise account because it's gone wrong there. So, but I'm not here to badmouth the competition at all. They are a good service for what they offer, but with themselves, you can get the same cost wise, but just get a bit more on a personal level.
Somebody
Also, you
says,
can't do forward contracts with Wise as well, so you can do them with us.
can I use somebody says, could you do one-time or infrequent money transfer? I think you answered that. Somebody says, how do you earn your living? Fees, exchange rates? Where does the Spartan make money?
Yeah, so our profit is built into the exchange rate. So we try to be as transparent as possible in that when we offer you a rate, that's what you get. So if you've got if you want to buy 100,000 euros and we say our current exchange rate is 109, it will cost you $109,000 to receive those 100,000 euros. There's no additional fees from ourselves, so it's all built into the rate, and that's what makes it transparent. So there's no sort of hidden fees or costs afterwards. It's just built into that, so you know exactly what you're getting, and it's easy to compare. Costs you might incur, if you're moving money from the USA, they'd probably charge you about between $25 to $40, typically generally $35 to make a transfer. Which again, that's why it's worth doing a minimum of sort of 5 to 10,000, because if you're moving $500 and it's costing you $50 to make the transfer, you've lost 10% straight away. So you might incur a small fee to send the US dollars. We actually cover receiving fees, which again is something that you don't get with other providers, especially with Wise and others, that we ensure the full amount will arrive in the destination bank account. Except for Australia, you might get charged $20. We can't cover that one, unfortunately, but generally everywhere else, Europe, UK, we ensure the exact amount arrives, which can be critical when we're doing things like a pension transfer where an exact amount has to arrive, or even a property purchase that the notary wants to the penny exact amount to arrive. It's not because they're being frugal over 10 euros. It's from a contractual point of view, an exact amount has to arrive.
Great. Okay. Somebody says if they transfer funds from the US to Japan, for example, does it necessarily go through pounds? Being a British company, I guess.
No. So the multi-currency. So while we're London based, and the accounts are based in the UK, they're in different currencies. So if you're moving Japanese yen to Saudi Rial, then it will go from JPY to SAR. There won't be any sterling transactions unless you're buying or selling sterling. So yeah.
Somebody says, do you use an intermediary? You may have just covered this, but I wanted the same thing. Do you use an intermediary US bank? So if somebody transfers from the US, it's a domestic transfer, or is it count as an overseas transfer if they're transferring funds to you from the US?
So we can provide a US routing code. So essentially it goes through Barclays in New York. We can accept ACH payments, which are essentially a US domestic payment. Again, with those, there can be a bit more hit and miss. And that's what we do with a lot of these things. There's different ways you can send money. So you can do it as an ACH, you can do it as a Fed wire, you can do it as a SWIFT transfer. And then in Europe, you can receive and send a SEPA payment. There's all different types of payments. And it depends, we look at your situation and say, well, actually, it's the best way to send it this way. This one will cost this, or this one will do that. So we can kind of look at your best options. And there's different ways to do it. So short answer, yeah, intermediary. We can put it through an intermediary bank in New York so that it'd be a domestic transfer. However, a lot of the time, clients will go make it as an international transfer. So typically, the most direct route is we provide US dollar bank details in the UK. you set up an international wire transfer from your US bank to your Spartan FX US dollar named account. It's an international wire. You get charged $35 to make that transfer. That's the general route, but we have got other options for different routing codes and ACH and Fedwire payments.
A couple of people asked if they, if they pay a deposit, or if there's money sort of sitting in their Spartan FX account, do they earn interest on it?
And that's no, we don't pay any interest on those accounts. Typically, funds don't stay with us particularly long. Once a client settles a trade, that's it. They move the money straight into their own euro account or to pay for a property purchase. We can hold funds, but it's not there as a sort of an interest facility. We're there as a currency conversion provider, basically. So that's what we do. So yeah, but you can leave funds there if you want.
A couple of people ask, can you receive checks?
No, we can't receive checks. I mean, in the UK, we don't really use checks much at all these days. I don't know the last time I saw one, to be fair. But unfortunately, clearing international checks is a nightmare. We used to do them many moons ago, and they used to take about 8 to 10 weeks to clear.
Oh.
And half the time they didn't clear. They got bounced. So I'd really avoid checks if you can. Just get the money paid into bank account. That said, in Spain, for example, if you're buying a property, the balance on that property often is done through a banker's draft, which is essentially a check. So that is a consideration if you're buying property, that on the day you get the keys for your house, you will hand someone a physical banker's draft. Yeah.
So can Spartan receive funds from a house sale directly from the broker?
Yes. So we would liaise with the lawyer or the notary, and they can nominate where they want those funds to be paid to, and they can just provide. And that's where we basically, a lot of time, we create a letter on headed paper that says this bank account is in Mr. Smith's name, this is their euro bank account, and this is where they would like the proceeds from a house sale to go to, and include purchasing as well. So they can use the bank details to receive funds from a house sale, which is quite useful, especially when I mean, we do a lot of spades. That's why sort of the examples are being used, so Spanish examples. But sometimes Spanish banks are quite tricky to work with, and also sometimes clients might have already closed down their bank account where they're leaving, and they sell their property a year down the line. So we have that facility that you can just pay the money straight into your Spartan account, especially if you don't have a US dollar account in the US anymore to pay the proceeds of that house sale too.
And I guess conversely, if you were buying a property in Spain, for example, you could pay directly rather than having to land in somebody's Spanish bank account for them to pay on.
Yeah. So we can pay that directly to. A lot of time it would go to the solicitor, just because that's generally how they prefer it. So on the day of the completion, the solicitor can then pass that on.
Which is the Spanish lawyer dealing with the purchase.
Yeah. So that said, so we've got some solicitor lawyers, law firms and notaries that we do that with. There are still a lot out there that 100% just want the banker's draft and won't accept it any other way. If you do need to do that, then you need to have your own Spanish bank account. We would pay the euros into that bank account, and then you'd ensure that a banker's draft is drafted before your completion. And there's a couple of Spanish banks that will actually let you start that ball rolling before you arrive in Spain or other parts of Europe as well, Spain and Portugal and the UK.
I think it'd be something to check with the CPA, but I think in that scenario, if it does need, that's Spain. If proceeds for a house or property purchase in, for example, Europe, have to go into an American's personal bank account in that country first. That will create a US reporting, requirement. I mean, it's not a big deal. It's something to check with the CPA, and it's like an extra form when filing the US tax return. But I think, it does kind of get around that if it can be paid directly to, as you say, to the lawyer dealing with a purchase. But everyone's situation is going to vary. It's going to vary country by country. So
Yeah,
definitely
absolutely. And in some cases, individuals buying properties through companies as well now, which is another consideration. So yeah, there's different options. And again, that's where speaking with the tax specialist is where you get the right answers. And then once you've worked that out, or where you're at, you can come to us for the current side of things, and we can work to whatever scenario you need to ensure for whatever it might be.
Okay, slightly different question. Do you help clients with international transfers of money in circumstances of inheritance, e.g., a US expat in the UK receiving inheritance from parents in the US, or leaving money in a will to US beneficiaries? Can you help with advanced planning for such transfers?
Yeah, so we do a lot of probate transfers. So we, especially in the UK side of things, we do quite a lot of probate. There was so a lot of what we used to do was sort of UK to Spain, and then unfortunately that was for the company sort of 20-30 years ago, and a lot of those individuals are now passing on, and therefore there is sort of probate and inheritance to deal with. So we often deal with the probate lawyer directly, and we can then do the distributions. So especially as if families that the money's going all over the world, we can then distribute based on the probate. So yeah, we do quite a bit of that these days.
Question about the Spartan account. Can the Euro IBAN you offer be a French IBAN? Can you choose the country, I guess?
No, so the accounts are all UK based. We do have a Frankfurt account, so we can make payments, receive payments through that. So then it's a EU based account, and that ensures that there isn't sort of fees charged on it as well. So as long as it's in the account within the EU, it doesn't really matter if it's in Germany, France, or Spain or Portugal. We can just direct through that Frankfurt account. So clients can send money into that and receive from it as well. So that covers on that side of things.
Excellent. I think, let's just do one more. Do you actually exchange money across borders, or exchange in the same country and balance on the other side? And does this method affect the exchange rate?
So do we exchange across borders?
So I guess I've sort of heard this sort of thing before. So if, for example, you're in the US and you want to send money to the UK, does the money I'm sending in that scenario kind of go from the US to UK, or do you keep what I transfer in the US and pay from other balances in the UK, so it doesn't actually cross borders?
It does leave it physically. So with an international, if you fund the US dollar account with an international wire transfer, it physically moves from the US to the UK.
Right.
And then if say you're paying it out to sterling, or if you're paying it out to euros, it will physically move to. So what we do is physical delivery of foreign exchange.
Cross borders.
It's called physical delivery, even though it's still a digital transfer. But yeah, essentially, I think that might be referred a bit more on the sort of speculative FX, where you're not actually moving money, you're just speculating on the value. We don't touch the speculation side of things. We just physically move people's money from one country to another.
Thank you. I see you've dropped in the webinar chat. I think it's a download link for a guide. So just to draw attention to that, everybody grab that before the webinar ends if you want that. Do you also, and then there's an email address behind you in your background, and that's the email address for anyone who has further questions, is it?
Yeah, they can use that email address, or they can put it to my personal email address as well, which
Do
is
you want to drop that in the chat as well? It might just be
actually, I'll
useful.
put that in the chat. So
Brilliant.
yeah.
Um,
So yeah, feel free to reach out, and always happy to schedule we do a lot of calls on Zoom, and we have a WhatsApp these days as well. So you can use that to
right.
so you can clients can we arrange calls on that, so you don't incur any costs to speak over on a WhatsApp call, and we find that's generally the quickest. Just a quick question, we can just answer it straight away, and then you've got sort of history of all the chat that we've had. So yeah, but feel free to start with to either use that link to fill out the form and we'll send you a moving money guide to the country that you're looking to move to, or drop me an email if you've got any questions or want to schedule in a call. I said the euro dollar rate right now is quite favorable, so it's moved down quite nicely. Clients are fixing well below 110 at the moment, so sort of around the 109 mark at this point, which historically isn't bad for a euro dollar transfer.
Excellent. Well, look, that's all we have time for today. Michael, thank you very much once again for the presentation.